Cyberpunk 2077. So this was pretty big news, I think, just because, you know, there's been a lot of debate, consternation around crunch in the video game industry. And I've got like some really maybe, you know, out there views on it. So it'd be really interesting to hear what you think, Swinny. But probably where the real big story comes in here is CD Projekt Red, which is a Polish developer and very like, you know, pro gamer, very consumer friendly, and historically have been pretty good from a dev perspective in the grand scheme of things. Last year confirmed with Jason Schreier, and he was the one who broke this story as well, that they would not be crunching for Cyberpunk 2077. And the result of that was the game had been delayed at least 2 times officially, and I think unofficially multiple times. And now that we're heading up to its release in November, is it November 19th from memory? I can't remember, Swinny. I think they're just at a point. Yeah, I think they're just at a point with the game where it's like it's still not quite finished. It has gone gold, but, you know, as they always do, they push out a day one patch that they've basically just said, you know what, like we have to hit this date. They've got massive ad campaigns for the game. The consoles are coming out, like the next gen consoles.
You're right. Yeah, November 19th. Yeah,
19th,
right.
yeah. And, you know, you got these next gen consoles coming out. They can't afford it to slip out of the Christmas period of time, that they've gone to their whole staff saying, look, we have to start working 6 days a week. So they're going to start working Saturdays, presumably, to get the game done. And yeah, this has had a huge reaction in more probably the gaming press and maybe a little bit in general, with the sort of gaming public out there. But yeah, what were your thoughts around this?
Well, first of all, you know, it's horrible to have mandatory overtime, regardless, like, of how I feel about, you know, the impact on the game and people's decisions to do this willingly. Is the fact that to come out and say essentially we are mandating this, is we're now working 6 days a week and up until, I guess, launch. That's crap. That is just absolute crap. You know, people, you know, obviously people, very passionate developers would be, you know, many of them probably happy to do this because they put so much time to this. They love what they're working on. You know, we've all been there in, you know, in different times. You know, when it comes to work, sometimes you feel passionate about delivering something that you'll put in that extra time. But to say that it's mandatory is just, it's rough. It's so rough. And I can't, the one thing that, you know, we haven't mentioned any statements from them, you know, in the email that went out to the staff yet, but obviously this isn't a decision they've taken lightly, and, you know, they've said that, look, you know, this is in direct opposition to how they feel about everything and how they feel about how development should be handled, but it doesn't change the fact that it's happened. You know, yeah, it's rough. It's rough because if this didn't happen, then you've got a whole bunch of people. Like, if this didn't happen, the game will probably push until next year. You know, and which is going to make a lot of people, you know, a lot of people very unhappy as well. And I think even if everyone signed on or it was optional or whatever, I still doesn't make it. I don't think it makes it right. Honestly, but it's tricky. Yeah. I don't know. What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts?
I mean, we should say that, you know, that it is paid overtime. You know, there is a lot of, actually, honestly, there's a lot of people I know that, you know, are asked to chip in and work more hours and sort of work weekends, and they're not getting paid for it. Like, they have their salary and they're still getting their salary. So, you know, it has been confirmed that they are going to get paid an extra day a week as to what they're normally getting paid. And also the way that CD Projekt Red does it internally, I should know this, but I can't remember if it's revenue or profit, but there is an actual sort of, you know, revenue sharing, income sharing amongst the staff. So they get about 10%, and it might not be profit. It might be profit, actually. It would make more sense if it was profit. It's probably 10% of profit of the game will actually be distributed amongst staff, which is very, very generous. And then they probably get the sort of normal bonuses that you normally get in video games, depending on, you know, Metacritic, unfortunately, scores, is normally they do it. And then potentially sales goals and things like that. For me, you know, I really don't understand the the only way I look at it is I look at games media and just go, okay, these are media people. They're just not in the artistic field, and it's a completely different realm. And then I just turn my mind to people who are creative, and then also people who are doing things that are, things that go down in history. Not like doing your regular job, like I do. I just do a regular job. But people who are doing things that people will talk about in 20, 30 years. And it's just not the same. It's not the same meaning to people. And, I look at, sports teams. They're asked to sacrifice, they're asked to travel, they're asked to, work very intensely, have time away from their families. And everyone looks at that and goes, okay, that's normal. I think there's just this weird, odd thing with, creative fields where people think it should be like a 9 to 5 job. And it just isn't. And historically, it's been proven many, many times. It's just not a 9 to 5 job. And for me, the only thing that I think is bad about this whole situation is that they pretty much went out there and said, we won't do this. Like, I think internally, you certainly don't want to have a culture where they're crunching 24/7. And that's sort of like the whole modus operandi of the studio. But I think, if you're doing anything around, the sort of mixing between tech and creative, you always just get into this situation where you think that there's only like 1 or 2% to go. And then when you really uncover it, it's actually a lot more. And then it has the sort of impacts of, I really want to rework all these things. And as I was sort of saying before, it's like, they're trying to create something that is defining of the generation, defining of their own respective careers, living up to the hype of what their rep got to with Witcher 3. And like, I don't know. And like, I should put more context out there. I've worked different jobs, and I've worked jobs where, I would work till 1, 2 a.m. and that wasn't even an odd thing. Like we'd hear people talk about, war stories about, people working the weekend and sleeping in the office. And that's like a celebrated thing. And I'm not saying this is normal, but it is normal in some areas and some workforces and some areas of work out there. And I just look at all this stuff and I don't really understand the reaction. Like I get the simple logic of going, you shouldn't have to do this. But the downstream impacts are these people are getting paid decent money and they're in Poland, and it's probably like one of the best jobs you can get in Poland. And they're going out there creating something that's truly artistic, and they need to hit this deadline. Like that's just the sort of be all and end all of it. I mean, the game was already meant to be out, and it's going to have a massive impact on the studio if they miss Christmas. Next gen and Christmas all happening at once. It's kind of a non-negotiable. So, like, I take them for their word that they're sort of a bit torn about this, and it's obviously embarrassing for them to go out there and say we don't. Crunch is never the answer, and then they've 1 year later going to everyone in their studio, hey, you have to crunch. But I just don't know why it's such a dirty word. I really don't understand it personally, outside of people just haven't lived it.
A lot of this is wrapped up in the fact that I can't speak for Poland and much of the EU on this, but the fact that there are no unions really for game developers, especially in the US, and what that has, when you combine that with the fact that crunch has been a problem for a long time, and you've got cases where it really came to light in Rockstar. I think there may have been some stuff around Blizzard as well. I'm not sure about that one, but the reason is because it sucks. It absolutely sucks for these people. And the problem is that when you mandate something, you take the option out of people's hands whether or not they want to. To say that it's all about being part of history and creating something, there may be devs in that studio where they're just like, this is just the thing I do to get a paycheck, and suddenly they can no longer do that. They're being forced to work an extra day that essentially is outside of. And I don't know from a contract standpoint if that's built in. That's an important part as well. Is this stuff built in to say this will every now and then you may be required to do this work, because then you should expect it almost, like that's part and parcel of contracts I've been, when you do events on weekends and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is that like mandating this is, I think that's the rough part. I'm fairly certain a lot of these people would do it regardless, right? But to mandate, I think is the part that really sucks for me. But what's different here, I think, than some of the other examples that have come up over the past, let's say, probably decade, is that CD Projekt Red have been pretty straightforward, and they've commented back to media outlets about this, and I think they've been very upfront and saying, look, we have gone back on our word, essentially, but we need to do this. So it's almost like they've owned up to it, as opposed to just trying to hide it away. They've actually gone out of their way to say, look, no, we promised this, and unfortunately there's no other. We've exhausted all our other options, and this is the only option we have. I do give them credit for that, but it still makes me feel very dirty that it's a mandatory thing for all staff. And that's the thing, is I don't know if it's just, okay, are we talking every single person? Because we know the game studios are more than just the actual coders and developers. There's the marketing staff, there's everyone else. I don't know if it's just specific people or it's everyone. I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think language matters here. And one thing that frustrates me is, and I'm not having a go at you, so don't take it like this. So I'll try to say it carefully, but I think language matters. And not so much what you're saying, but I have heard a lot of other people, the way they talk about this, they have to do this or they're forced to. It's like, they're not. They're not slaves. Every day you go into work, you're choosing to go into work. You don't have to go there. And I've worked at places I haven't liked and I've moved on. And, I've worked in environments where they ask a lot from you. And then over time, I'm like, you know what, this isn't for my life. But to kind of ask them to change what they are, this is, to me, a part of the creative process. Sometimes you get to the end of something and it's, everyone's expecting you to deliver something by a certain date. And that date doesn't move normally. So you just kind of have to suck it up. And the whole mandatory thing to me is, I look at it maybe the other way, and maybe I'm like a psycho, but I look at it in the way of, I'd probably be one of the people that was already working on the weekend, because I'm like, hey, you know what? We're not going to get through this unless we start adding a Saturday.
But and then I look around and go, though. Not everyone's like that, though. There's people that value the value. Let me just say this one thing. There's people that value their personal time. I've had to I've quit jobs over just being too stressed, and I went through a period where I was working like that, and I just said, look, my mental health and my personal time is not worth this. The business doesn't care about me as an individual enough for me to care about that. And the problem with saying, well, they don't have to do that. Well, they do, because they'll essentially, if they don't and they quit, they'll be blackballed from working in that industry, at least, especially in that region. Oh, 100% they would be, because they're relying on references, they're relying on connections. If you're talking in Poland, CD Projekt Red is the powerhouse there. Now, It's not the only studio that's in that region, but suddenly if you then say, well, I've spent my whole career working at CD Projekt Red, but I can't get a good reference from them because they felt that I quit because I didn't want to do this. Well, that is harming you. It's not just a matter of, I don't want to do this. It's like you are essentially forced into doing this. Otherwise, you're going to hamstring your career, basically.
Nah, look, I couldn't, I respect what you're saying, but I couldn't disagree with you anymore. What you did was the right thing. You didn't like the environment you were in, and you made a decision to do the best thing for you, which was to get out of there. I just look at it as I take it into the realm of sport. If I go into a team and I go, hey guys, we're training too hard, we're doing the extra sessions, this isn't working for my, work-life balance, that team is just going to lose. They're not going to win the grand final. They're never going to get on with it. They're never going to win a title, right? So, I've come into an environment and tried to change fundamentally how it works, which is against, that whole competitive field, rather than looked at myself and said, am I able to go into that space? Whatever you do in life, if I go, one thing I've always been interested in is to get into politics, but that's a huge trade-off that you're making. around your personal life and your relationships and all these things. It's not like you go in and go, I want the world to change around me to fit what I want. It's, you have to understand the environment and what it's all about. I had an opportunity to go into game development and into that space, but I didn't choose to go down that path because I know that crunch is just a part of that field. It's been a part of it from the start. I don't ever see it going away because people are complex. People aren't that great at estimating things. People aren't that great at, trading things off and sort of going, hey, 80% is good enough here. We need to move on instead of perfecting it and then going, shit, we don't have enough time to get through all of this. And I just look at it and go, like, if you're the kind of people who are pulling your weight in the studio and then not everyone else is, like, this is kind of an important thing to do and go, hey, everyone, we have to all pull together here and not just rely on like maybe half the studio working more time and crunching. We just have to, bite the bullet and all do it together. And it's not forever also, by the way. Like they're talking about doing this now. It's probably the last like 6 weeks of development. Like that's, I don't know. I find it like totally reasonable in my world. And I find the whole reaction from everyone to be so unreasonable. So I don't know. And we've said before that I'm very capitalist and corporate. So maybe this is the ultimate nail in the coffin for that kind of stuff.
I think what you're saying, well, that's just part and parcel. Well, and this is what people have been saying for long. Well, it shouldn't be. There's something fundamentally wrong with the process of game development if that is part and parcel. Now, so what I'm asking you here is, so let's say you've got a developer in Poland that, you are Polish, you live in Poland, you've never, let's say you don't have the, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to move to another country in the EU. Let's say, you're Polish through and through, right? I'm just saying, right? Let's say that's not really an option that just meshes well with your personal life. You want to live in Poland, right? You're saying that it wouldn't hurt someone's career if they chose to leave because of this decision.
No, what I'm saying is that they have made a very poor judgment from the start, right? They've entered a field where if you go into games development and think that you're going to work a 9-to-5 job, you're fooling yourself fundamentally. And I think it's a different debate about, is this right or wrong? Is this the way the games industry and development industry should work? Like, I'm more than happy to have that debate one day. I think that's a kind of almost a separate debate in a weird way versus like what's happening right here and right now. Because this is an instance versus like, should this always happen? But the reality is, if you're going into this field, and I made this choice in my life, if you're going into this field, you got to accept that this is the way the field operates. Maybe it will change one day. And by the way, I think it's gotten a lot better as a whole. Like there's still some really terrible examples, like Naughty Dog. It's basically like crunch for 2 years straight. So they were working weekends for the last 2 years, not 6 weeks. I think, yes, the biggest part of this is they've gone out publicly saying, we're not going to do this. They've gotten a bunch of journalists on their side saying, this is a good example of a studio doing the right thing. And then they've backed off. Like that's a massive error on their part in CD Projekt Red. But yeah, look, obviously we agree to disagree on this one. I just think that you've made a decision to go in a field where you had kind of no right to go into in the first place. Like, it's like going, I want to get into politics, but I don't want people to pry into my personal life. Now, whether that's right or wrong, if they do that, is a separate thing. It's the same as like, oh, I don't want people attacking my family or me on Twitter if I'm in politics. Park the whole, is it right or wrong that people do that? It will happen. So if you do not have the stamina, if it doesn't make sense for your life to be able to take that on board with that whole sort of perspective of how it's going to work, you're setting yourself up for a fail to go into that field. I'm sorry to say. And if you can't crunch for 6 weeks, like, I don't know. Like, it's not a, hey, we're going to do this for 5 years straight or 2 years straight like at Naughty Dog. Like, I just think you're in the wrong field. And the whole thing of unions in developers, like, that's another conversation. I think that's crazy as well.
Yeah, but the reason I brought it up is because these two topics have been very linked together throughout, as I said, the last decade. Like, this has been a thing that has really been, they've been swirling, around each other. And so that's why I kind of mentioned it. So, but yeah, that is a very different thing. So.
Yeah, and look, like at some point we're not going to get anywhere here, but I do think there's always a balance in life with these things. And I think, there was a period of time in the last 10 years where it was far too much on the studio side, the publisher side, where it's pushing that creative workforce to work themselves to the bone and then not really reap the rewards of that either. I think that part of it is really wrong. Like, I think having the developers and the people in the studio share in more of the gains is what it needs to be and needs to be more of. And getting that balance right is important, but I just think the idea of it never crunching is just unrealistic and it will never happen. But I guess we'll see.